of the income taxes that come into play. Taking that money out over a 10-year period is going to force a lot more income tax to be paid, and that's where you get the revenue that Mark was discussing before to pay for the rest of the Secure Act. Now, what we're going to do today is, first of all, I'm going to review what the changes in the law were. Then we're going to apply those changes in the law to what I would view as very, very common situations. And then we're going to talk about where we go from here and what kind of planning things you might want to consider going forward. Now, in terms of my materials, I just want to kind of lay them out a little bit in terms of how I'm going to go through the materials. But basically what you all have is an outline, which again is what I'm going to be discussing. The last page of the outline is going to be this flow chart. And we also gave you a free non-stapled flow chart because you might want to have that alongside as you look through the outline. In addition to that, there's another handout staple that has two things in there. One is a single life expectancy table, which we'll get to in a few minutes. And then the second thing that's in there is actually the statute, 401A9. So for those of you that like to read the code, I have it there for you, and it's certainly worth taking a look. Now, the way I'm going to go through the materials is, frankly, walking down and walking through this flow chart. And that's going to be our home base, and pretty much everything I'm going to be saying is included within the outline. So this is what I'm going to keep coming back to. So without further ado, let's talk about this outline, or the flow chart, and how it plays out. So the very, very top in the middle is death of an IRA owner. What is the first question you ask yourself when a client dies and you're dealing with the retirement distributions? Is there a beneficiary? Or more specifically, what you're going to ask is there a designated beneficiary? Now, designated beneficiary is a defined term in the Internal Revenue Code. A designated beneficiary has to be an individual. You can be a beneficiary and not necessarily a designated beneficiary. How does that come into play? Well, if you name a non-individual, like a charity or your estate or what have you, you have a legal beneficiary, that's who's going to get the money, but it's not going to fit within the IRS definition, and that becomes important. It still becomes important as we work our way through the distribution rules. So the first question again is there a designated beneficiary? And for purposes of our example, start out, let's say you don't have one. The very, very next question you have to ask yourself is, did the beneficiary die before or after the required beginning date? Now, as Mark was indicating, the required beginning date went from 70 and a half, and it got pushed back to age 72. So it's later, and if you look at my materials, I think it's on page 5 of the materials, I have a chart, and it really lays out what Mark just talked about. The key date in all this is June 30th, 1949. So that's what you have to really be aware of. So the first question, do I have a designated beneficiary? Second question is, did I die before or after my required beginning date? Now, let's say I didn't die after or before my, I died before my required beginning date and I did not have a designated beneficiary. What you'll see on my outline and you'll see in front of you is the 5-year rule comes into play. Well, I just got done saying that the headline is retirement distributions come out over 10 years. And that's true. For most situations and most clients, the 10-year rule is going to come into play. But the 5-year rule is alive and well, and you still have to be aware of that, because if you die before your required beginning date, you do not have a designated beneficiary, then the 5-year rule applies. And for those of you that are really into the code or what have you, what the section says is literally, if you're a designated beneficiary, you swap out 5 and you put in the word number 10. So that's all you're really doing is switching around for designated beneficiaries, but otherwise the same rules apply. And in this regard, it's also important to understand that the changes under the Secure Act lay on top of the existing rules. They only changed a couple of different provisions, so a lot of the basic rules that you're mostly going to be familiar with, they are still going to apply. So normally, I get, when I talk about retirement distributions, I make a very, very big deal about the fact that it's very important that everybody have a designated beneficiary. One of the quirks under the new law is that that's not entirely true anymore. So what am I talking about? I frequently ask myself that. So let's pretend what happens is, suppose you die before your required beginning, after your required beginning date, and you do not have a designated beneficiary. What rule comes into play? Well, in this scenario, what you get to do is you get to take the money out over the participant's remaining life expectancy. A lot of times this is called the ghost life expectancy. And if you look in the handout that I gave you, we go to that single life table that I was included within your materials. And if you go to what happens if you get to die at 73, and I have a line in there to break it apart, what you're going to see is that if your remaining life expectancy for the participant at the age of 73 is 16.3 years. You may notice that 16.3 is more than 10. So actually, if you die after your required beginning date, you're actually better off not having a designated beneficiary until you get to the age of 81. So you get this kind of gap period where you would actually get a better result if you did not have a designated beneficiary. So when I first read this, I'm thinking to myself, how big a deal is that? Is it really worth planning around? What are you going to do? It's tough enough to get your clients to come in and do a beneficiary designation in the first place. I'm going to have them come in, and I'm going to do one when they're 73 and another one when they're 81, and I kind of poo-pooed it a little bit. But as I looked in the area a little bit more, what people are doing and people are talking about doing is if you have your retirement money paid to a trust, it's not that difficult to include a provision in the document saying that if I die within certain ages, then a non-designated beneficiary gets some money and it forces me onto this rule. So what I'm saying to